Hello and welcome to the Atma Paradigm. We are now starting part 3 of this webinar series, and this particular part is to do with life. And today what we're going to do is give an introduction to this particular section of the Atma Paradigm, and in doing so we'll do a little recap of some of the things that we have discussed in parts 1 and 2. So, first of all, welcome to everyone, particularly those who have valiantly laboured through all of the 16 talks that we have given in parts 1 and 2, and congratulations to you. And I hope that this summary contains some useful kind of reminders and new thoughts. And for those of you joining us today, this is a good point to connect with the Atma Paradigm. And I hope that the recap that we'll give will equip you for enjoying the rest of this series. I would like to do just a little poll exercise. Now, this may be only available for those of you on the Facebook broadcast. So the question is this your first time listening to the Atma Paradigm webinar series? And if it is, I'd really like to know, because it gives us an idea of how many have joined. So you've got 3 choices. Yes, it's your first. Or no, I've heard some of the previous talks. Or no, I have followed all of them. And that would be great to know how many of you have actually managed to do that. So, life, an alternative view. The consciousness-based framework that defines the origins, variety and activities of life. That is what is on offer through the 8 parts of this series. So, it's a different analysis about life than you would have heard from your school or your university. Because with the Atma Paradigm, we are proceeding from the basis that consciousness is an irreducible feature of reality, meaning that consciousness is not a product of matter or brain activity. Now, really the question that we are posing in the Atma Paradigm is to take that aspect of consciousness being irreducible and say, what does that perspective mean for science? Now, if you feel that you're not sure about that as a starting point, then I'm afraid I'm going to have to point you towards the topics and talks of part 1. And I'm going to give a little bit of explanation and justification for why we're able to say consciousness is irreducible. But if it's a sticking point or you have any doubts, you're going to have to go through the earlier talks of part 1 and then maybe join us on this. In part 2, we also dealt with a number of the issues that are often cited about consciousness and science and philosophy. For instance, how can a non-physical mind interact with the brain? All the standard questions that are raised. And we believe that we have dealt with them sufficiently. Sufficiently that we can come to the point where there must be great doubt that the idea that the brain can produce consciousness, that the brain is solely responsible for all aspects of our subjective experience, that's in doubt. And it must be allowable and reasonable that we postulate the idea that maybe we should be looking at the world from a different starting point. The starting point that consciousness is an irreducible feature of reality. And then asking, what does that mean for the rest of our sciences? And in this section, we're asking, what does that realization, that starting point mean for biology? So, we start with looking at a background of the Atma Paradigm. And what it is trying to do is look at these 4 big questions of our existence. Consciousness, matter, the universe, life. And it asks you to address these questions. Now, the scientific process tries to look at each of these questions, and but because science is defined as a particular methodology, it is by its own kind of setup, it's limited in its scope for investigation. So as a methodology for discovering truth about the world, it has sacrificed scope, the scope of what it can investigate, for clarity within the boundaries of its methodology. And I've indicated that within the limits of the red hexagon. However, and we have to say that science is rather brilliant when it is working within those boundaries. It has produced incredible discoveries and insights about the nature of this world. However, there are aspects of each of these topics, consciousness, matter, life, the universe, which lie outside of that hexagon, which is beyond the scope of the scientific method. Not because of our current knowledge, not because of our know-how, but by definition of the method that needs to be used to call itself scientific. To give an example, probably the biggest omission for science and the scientific method, it has been consciousness. And I'll touch on that a little bit later in this talk. And with that omission about consciousness, I think it's contributed to the inability to provide clarity on the nature of life. We can look at some biological processes, but still not understand what we mean by life. Now, the limitations and boundaries that science has provided means that many scientists are relying on non-scientific statements and arguments in order to create a bigger narrative, to be able to tell a bigger story, particularly about the origins of aspects of consciousness, life, and the universe. Now, in the Atma Paradigm, we respect science, and we try to use it and apply it as it is intended, to provide a degree of certainty about evidence. Science deals with evidence, and it tells us what level of certainty we can apply to that evidence. But what the evidence reveals, that's a matter of philosophical analysis, and that requires applying sound philosophical logic. So the Atma Paradigm we're presenting to you is an alternative philosophical framework. It is based on the insights of Vedic wisdom. We're not here to try and prove them, but at times we have borrowed on the insights that exist within the Upanishads, Vedanta, Sankhya, the Yoga texts, because they reveal some very interesting aspects that shed light on our scientific evidence. And the Atma Paradigm seeks to be absolutely consistent with accepted scientific evidence. And it is a bigger framework. It is able to take in all of what science can offer and more by extending our understanding of the scientific evidence through sound philosophical logic. And that is how we have tried to build up from the starting points that we all agree on in terms of our existence to where we are now. It is part of a bigger ontological picture. And although it is not our intention to prove these aspects, we say that at least the Atma Paradigm as a philosophical framework can accommodate a theological proposition. Now, the standard narrative that that many in science try to work by is that we start off with matter and reality being produced subsequent to the Big Bang. And somehow or other matter coalesces and forms the structure of the universe. And then on one little rock somewhere in the cosmos, life gets a hold. And when life gets to a certain level of complexity, consciousness emerges. That's the order in which of the standard narrative, if you like. Now, the Atma Paradigm approaches it differently. We start with consciousness. And then, by understanding the nature of consciousness, who we are and how we understand things, we can look at the world and define what matter is in relationship to us as existential beings. And by understanding the interaction between consciousness and the world, matter and reality, we are actually able to offer a definition of the nature of life. And once having understood life, we can appreciate the nature of the universe in its efforts, if you like, to accommodate and facilitate life. So, without understanding consciousness, we can't be sure that we have a true understanding of matter and reality. And that's what we covered in sections part 1 and part 2. Now, we are going to start exploring life. So, here are the principal parts that I want to offer you as part of the recap. Part 1 means that these are topics that came up in part 1. Sometimes I've included a little reference to the side of the slide if there was a particular talk where this was covered in detail. So, we start that the presumption that the brain produces consciousness has not been substantiated. What do we mean by consciousness? Well, that has not been clarified within the theories and ideas that how the brain produces it. We will offer some clarity on that, and we will show how the brain model fails to address the hard problem. So the Atma Paradigm is proposing an alternative approach, that consciousness is irreducible to physical properties. It is its own field of reality. It is composed of and exhibits the property of consciousness. That is our kind of starting proposition. And we are going to define that the fundamental quantum unit of this field of consciousness is called the Atma. I'm going to take you through these principal points now. We start with trying to, I give a shorthand called the brain model. This is the idea that you are your brain, which is a common statement that I've heard from various neuroscientists. And the idea is that all aspects of consciousness, all aspects, they say, can be explained completely by reference to the neurological functions of the brain. Now, this brain model is a catch-all term for many different theories, and we did explore those in detail. But theories that are conceived under the presumption that the brain is wholly responsible for all aspects of consciousness. So when we say all aspects, it's not just the ones we like or the ones we think we can explain, that we can pick and choose. It has to be all aspects if it is to be true. Is it? Well, can it be justified? No. What we showed, and it was talk 3, was that it didn't address our sense of existence. It didn't address aspects of our inner mental experience. These are aspects which defy reduction to brain activity, no matter how hard people have tried. And I'm going to take you through that. So although we've got the brain, although we've got neural activity, it doesn't explain the you, who you are. It doesn't explain the phenomenon of your experience of qualia, which is shown in this red ball. I'm able just to give a very little summary of this in these next few slides. But all of this is covered deeply in part 1. So we start with something that we try to agree on. What are the pre-philosophical intuitions? These are sort of axioms. They're baseline things that we each accept as certain. And they form what really should be the common starting point for philosophical thinking. So let me go through them. I exist. I have a sense that I exist because I feel I experience things. And I'm believing that you have the same thing. Even if you have doubt on who or what you are the thing which is addressing that question. Therefore you feel you experience. And in our definition, that means you exist. I am the witness of my thoughts and actions, and I believe you are also the witness of your thoughts and actions. I am the subject of my mental experiences. These are things happening to me. I say, I see this, I feel this, I think this. I am the subject. And subject as the nominative case in the sentence. So I'm the subject of all my mental experiences, thoughts and memories. And this is sometimes challenged, but when you think about it, it does seem to be true that I am the unchanging subject of my experiences throughout my life. My body, my psychology, my personality, these things change. But that person who is experiencing the activities and thoughts of my childhood body, my youth body, my adult body, and to this old age body now, I'm still the same subject of my experiences. And I aspire for enjoyment as pleasurable or favourable states of mind. Now we know people who are only happy when they're miserable, But for them, that's a favourable state of mind, something we aspire for. But the first three, these are axiomatic, even if you might feel that you can argue with the last two. So this helps us try to build an understanding about what is involved in an explanation of consciousness. And I think this was probably best expressed by Professor John Searle. I disagree with him on many other aspects of his interpretation, but I think he got this right, and it's very important. That the essential trait of consciousness that we need to explain is unified, qualitative subjectivity. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, but so we'll try and unpack it. It's not a definition of consciousness, but it's a good summary of the key points that must be included in any explication or analysis of consciousness. So I think this statement keeps philosophers and scientists on the right track when it comes to talking about consciousness. So what do the words mean? Unified. Well, it means that I feel I am the sole, the singular, unchanging, complete individual entity of that is having the experiences. I'm not several people. I may have different views. I may at times be nice and I may at times be nasty. That's different. That's kind of exhibiting different aspects of my personality. But me as the experiencer, that entity who is having who is the subject and experiencer of and witness of all my thoughts, that is an individual unified entity. Next one is subjectivity. This refers to me as the I, who is the subject having the experience, the witness, the person who knows I exist. And then the third one is qualitative. Now this is an interesting one. And this one requires a little bit more of an exploration. Each of them are crucial, but you probably feel maybe a little more confident of what we mean by unified and what we mean by being the subject. But I urge you to try and get your head around this aspect of qualitative experience. And it's worth just giving a little time to this. We did it in detail in a number of the talks in part one, but I'm going to give a little bit here just to help those who are joining us. So whereas the other principles arise from our intuition and kind of personal sense of it, they're kind of subjective. The qualitative aspect of consciousness can actually be explored empirically by neuroscience and psychological experiments. And therefore it represents what I would say is the Achilles heel of the whole physicalist idea that the brain is the source of consciousness. It is the Achilles heel of the brain model. So let's have a little look at why the brain model has so far failed to explain conscious experience, and not just why it has done so to date, but for many, why it will never be able to explain consciousness. We start with a diagram that I have borrowed from a seminal paper on neuroscience by Francis Crick of DNA fame and Christoph Koch, who was his collaborator. It was a framework for consciousness, and this diagram kind of shows what we regard as the easy bits of consciousness. They're actually quite complex and they involve incredible machinery and great intelligence to really look at it, but they're called the easy problems because we kind of know how they work. We all agree on how information about the world, for instance, how it looks, travels. Light bounces off. In this picture, we've got the man, the dog, the trees, and goes into our eyes, hits the retina. It's converted by the cones and the rods which make up the layer of our retina, and it sets off biochemical electrical signals. Each cone, if it's fired, sets a little signal, bleep, to the visual processing cortex, goes down the optic nerve, goes to the back of the brain, and there it is. And you see neural functions. It shows the neurons kind of connecting together. Ions are jumping from one neuron to another. So this electrical data can be said to represent the information coming from the outside world. And that's why Crick and Koch showed it as that kind of digital barcode. It's a kind of digital format because that's the way it is in the brain. So there's no argument, no problem so far. But it's what happens next that you should know is weird and inexplicable. But probably you've always taken it for granted. The fact is that what you see out of all of that is a picture of the scene. You see the man, the dog, the trees. You see it as an image. You see shapes, you see colours, you see movement. And it's shown here just with the dog being highlighted. And this is from Crick's picture. But we have an image. Now you might say, of course we have an image. Our eyes are looking out at the world is full of these forms. Of course we have an image. No, wait a minute. Whatever is out there in the world, our only connection with it is the light that came into our eyes. And that light formed, an image on the retina, but then it was converted into individual electrical signals. The picture disappeared at that point, and it's gone to the brain, and it's just neurons firing. There's no picture there. Why is it that I experience that electrical activity in the brain as an image? That becomes the big question. And it's not just imagery. All our senses do the same. They feed electrical activity into the brain, but some of that electrical activity we experience as sound. Now you might say, yes, but sound is things vibrating out there. No, the only way we know about that vibration is that our eardrum flapped and it set up some pressure, but then it set up some electricity into the brain. The sound, if it's out there, our only way of knowing that sound is that the brain has got some electrical activity. But we experience that electrical activity as a sound. Similarly, we experience chemicals which enter our mouth and touch our tongue as flavours, as chemicals that go into our nose as fragrances, as signals from different parts of our body, from our nerves, as touches. This is weird. And the qualities of each of these sounds, smells, tastes, images, and so on, these are called qualia. So, qualia are the qualities of our inner experiences. The shapes, the colours, the sounds, the flavours, fragrance, emotions, bodily sensations that we experience. We may think that they belong to the outside world, but we experience them purely as mental things. And we gave some evidence and analysis to show that there is a difference between what the outside world has and what you experience. So qualia, very important word, qualia. Latin words in the plural, it refers to qualities. But the qualities as we experience them in our minds, and that's why we showed the proverbial red ball. There is something that it is like to experience that redness. Not the emotional effect of red on you, that it's warm or something, but the actual redness. And it's different from experiencing the blueness. So, these qualities may relate to the world out there, but we showed how colour is actually generated by the mind, rather than being a definite feature of the external world. So have a look at that in one of our earlier talks. So the challenge for neuroscience and for philosophy has been to explain our qualitative experience and the experience of qualia. So, and it has been impossible to do that and break it down to what we know the brain has got. It has proved impossible so far. And many believe that the nature of qualia and our mental experience is entirely different to the experience that can be shown to be available from the activities of the electricity in our brain. Now, so, brain model has big problem with our existence, with the nature of subjective experience, and with qualia. But is there any direct evidence that the brain can produce consciousness? Well, here it all is. All shown in this slide, every bit of it. There is no direct evidence being produced by neuroscience that proves or gives evidence to consciousness as we have discussed it in this talk, as John Searle has defined it. unified qualitative subjectivity. There is no evidence that the brain can produce that. Are there theories then? Well, there's lots of theories. And we talked about how the theories fail because each of them tries to deal with consciousness in a way that actually is not reputable. One way is to try and diminish what we're talking about consciousness. To say, well, if consciousness is just information or mental content or process, then we can deal with it. Fine. But it's not just that. Or to say, well, consciousness, it's an emergent property. It's an epiphenomenon. But that means nothing, because there's no explanation of how that emergent property appears from that which we know the brain is doing. So that's a kind of conjuring. It's just pulling a rabbit out of the hat. Or we try to deny, well, maybe consciousness doesn't exist because we cannot find it in the brain. Therefore, it must not exist. It must be false. It must be some kind of illusion. But we know we exist. We know we have consciousness. So that doesn't seem to be a very sensible approach. And we showed how some philosophers call it the silliest idea ever. And then there's, of course, promise. Well, we haven't got it now, but later on we'll have a good theory of the physical source of consciousness. We'll show how it's there in the brain. Fine, that's a promise. But it's not a theory. It's not science. Because we need evidence. We haven't any evidence to base the idea that the brain produces consciousness. That is the point. So, this means that we kind of have to maybe look at it in a different way. Why just keep beating ourselves in the same way? Consciousness seems to be irreducible. The features of qualia, the imagery of the dog, the sounds of the world, the taste, the flavours that we experience in our mind, this qualia cannot be broken down to the physics of our brain or the outside world. So maybe we need to put them into their own category. Rather than thinking that only the world of physics as we have currently understood it is the all in all, we need to extend our sense of reality and at least try this as a method. That's all I'm saying. You may think, well, I don't want to go there. But the physical kind of system is not producing answers. Maybe another approach might. Let's put the mind in its own category. All right? And then we question, well, who or what experiences the content of our minds? Who's experiencing the qualia? And what we're suggesting is that consciousness also is separate from the mental functions, because the activities of the mind in terms of the imagery that we experience of the world, the thoughts that we have, the emotions, the desires, these are all content. These are things that I experience within my mind. So I may be something different to the mind. The mind may be something different from the brain, but I, as the conscious entity, may be something different to both mind and brain. So, we're suggesting that our proposition is that consciousness is irreducible to physical properties. It is its own field of reality, which is composed of and exhibits the property of consciousness shown by unified qualitative subjectivity. And we are defining that that consciousness, this field, has a kind of its own quantum unit, its own fundamental particle, if you like, of consciousness. And we are calling that the Atma. I'll give a little bit of explanation. Now, is this a complicated model of perception and experience? Maybe, but it's kind of starts to be complete. At least we found a home for everything. And actually, this model is staring you in the face at this very moment. How did I know? You are looking at this moment, hearing my voice, you are looking at a computer screen. So, it's the same analogy. Your computer has sensors and it's picking up information about what's going on around you. You might have a microphone, a camera. And these correspond to bodily senses. Trying to get information about the world, turn them into data. That data for the computer goes into the CPU, and of course for our senses it goes to the brain. But neither the computer nor your brain holds that data that it got from the world through the senses or the sensors. It doesn't hold that data in a format that you can access and you can or experience. So the data has to be converted into something that you can experience. And we raise the question, why does a computer need a screen? It's not for itself. A computer can handle and deal with data on its own. It can make decisions. It can act on things. It can send out input or outputs and get things working. But why does it have a screen? Well, that's because the screen is there to convey the data that exists within the processor in a format that is accessible to something that is not itself. The screen is to connect with something that is not the computer, i.e. the operator. And similarly, from the analysis that we've done, it seems that we have a parallel, that the brain has data, but that data is not accessible to us as consciousness. So it needs the interface of the mind, which somehow takes the data of the brain and processes it in a way that is available to be experienced in a qualitative way, as imagery and sounds and so on, by consciousness. Something that we can experience and enjoy. So that's 1.6 talk deals with a bit more of that. We gave a little bit of evidence on non-neural consciousness, and that can be explored in 1.7. I think you'll find some of that interesting, but I haven't time to go through it all today. Look up 1.7 if you want to see more evidence on that. So we define the Atma. It's a Sanskrit term, but we have chosen to use it because it has a certain precision. It is the smallest unit composed of and possessing a quantum of the property of consciousness. It is that which we are, not what we have. We are the Atma. And this defines us, me as a conscious entity, as an individual, personal being, having subjective existence. And that means I'm the seer, the witness, the observer, the experiencer of qualia. So this is the conscious self beyond our identification with other forms of selfhood, to do with my psychology, my personality, my social kind of connections and so on. We're trying to get beyond those ideas of selfhood to the one that cannot be defined by the outside world or our body or our mind. That is the conscious self, which is defined only by the fact that I am the observer of my experiences. And one of the aspects that we're going to look at within this life section is to understand the Atma as a non-physical coordinating particle. Now, here's some other parts that came up, in part 2 aspects that came up, which we need to know in order to make progress into part 3. By understanding consciousness, we're now able to look again at matter and think about how is it that non-physical, non-neural, non-mental consciousness is able to interact with the physical stuff. So we looked at matter and we realized that actually what we're dealing with here, we may think it's all hard stuff and it's made of bricks and timber and all sorts of hard things, but ultimately it's energy containing information. And this combination of energy and information manifests properties that are observable to our senses. So we've given a whole analysis of that. And we have defined mental cognitive functions distinct from both brain activity and from consciousness. So we then build a model of these 3 fields of reality, which we use to explain various aspects of perception, which the brain model cannot deal with, to explain certain psychological aspects which the brain model has problems with. So this has proved to be a very effective model. And here it is in summary, which is all I can do today. I beg you to go through part 2 if you like. So, consciousness, mind, and the physical world. These are our three fields of reality. And we have a particular relationship between them. And we showed how they can interact one with the other. So this is because each of them is part of a bigger kind of picture of reality, if you like. There is something which encompasses all of them. They're not separate features or separate realities. They are three facets of the one reality. So we put a box around them like this. All aspects of the model are real and actual. Some people say, well, consciousness is real, therefore mind maybe not, or physical world's not. Or they say the physical world's the only thing that's real, mind may not. No. We say consciousness, mind, physical world, they are real, they are actual. And they have relationships. Because they are elements of a bigger reality, they can interact. And we talk about the cause and effect relationship between them. So in simple pictures, here we have a continuum of reality. As I said, we're saying there's one reality, but it would be illogical to say that the one reality that we all experience is undifferentiated, because we see that there is differentiation in terms of me and what I experience. Me and my mind, me and the world, me and other minds, me and other conscious beings. There seems to be distinction. So there's differentiation. So what I want you to do is to think of reality as a continuum of many interrelated fields. And each of these fields has specific properties and functions. So at one end, what we have is physical matter, the physical stuff, composed of energy and information manifesting observable properties. And somewhere else on that continuum, we have the phenomenon and property of consciousness. Now we're talking about these as broad aspects of reality, not just as individuals like you and me. We're talking about consciousness as a principle, as a field that we are part of, but we're talking about it in very broad terms here. Now, being facets of the same overarching reality, there's natural relationship and interaction between them. Matter is defined as energy and information, which manifests properties, and consciousness is the observer of those properties. It is the observer and experiencer of the information content of those properties. Therefore, there is a natural connection and relationship. However, we suggest that this relationship is facilitated, as we've just been describing in the computer example, it's facilitated by the interface of the mind. So, these are our three facets. Now, the next couple of slides are details which are not crucial for the rest of this talk and may not even be that crucial for the rest of the life aspects. They're helpful, and you can go to talk number 4 if you want to understand how we have broken down physical reality as a combination of what seems to be the hard stuff, the physically observable properties, and a kind of soft stuff, the subliminal proto-physical qualities which manifest it. 2.4 gives that. It's not crucial for the rest of this talk. And we also gave some subfields of the cognitive functions. We talked about the pool of the mind, the gatekeeper of discerning intelligence, and the theatre of awareness. Again, not crucial for today's talk, but you can explore that in those other talks in part 2. However, what is crucial is that we understand that what we call the physical stuff of the external world contains information, which is really sensory data. And this information specifies the subliminal proto-physical sensory qualities that are then observed and experienced when present within physical objects. This gives physical objects their particular properties which we interact with through our senses. Now, this sensory data can be accessed by the mind. And the mind, in combination with the rest of the cognitive functions, processes this information as mental content and prepares it for presentation to the conscious entity, the Atma. So the conscious entity, Atma, identifies itself with an aspect of the mind, and it enjoys the experience of qualia and this world. Now, again, complicated picture. It's not crucial for today's talk. Please explore that in part 2. But we gave some examples and evidence to show that mental content is different to physical information. And one of the ways we demonstrated that was to use the remote viewing or remote perception techniques that were developed by Stanford Research Institute through their International Human Consciousness Research Program of the 1970s, and which were then kind of further developed for use by the CIA in their psychic spying thing. Now, some people might say, well, this is not real science. Of course it is real science. They worked, in a reputable institute. They used all the kind of clinical methods, and they got results which can be statistically verified. So what that showed is the potential for the mind to access information without reliance on what we have gained through our senses or what we have previously known within our memories of our brains. The mind can access subtle information about the world. That was the message that we gave in that particular talk. And we showed that it's possible that it doesn't have to be just human to human connections, that there can be even connections between Amy, who's shown in the picture, and her parrot, Nikisi. And that was quite an astounding experiment that was done to show that Nikisi can pick up on her owner's mind and repeat words about pictures that she is viewing in a distant place. So, other points that we want to establish in part 2 is now what to do with this model. How does it work? We've shown how it works in terms of perception, but there's another aspect which is to do with volition and will, free will. So we now demonstrate that these three fields interact by sharing information without contravening physics. We show that consciousness has causal agency. It can do things in this world. It can cause things to change, to be affected, to be created. Conscious intention generates specifying information, and I'll give you a definition and explanation of that in a moment. And specifying information then produces action and manifestation in the physical realm. So let's try and understand the nature of this. First of all, a couple of definitions. Free will. That is the potential to determine choices at one's own discretion. Often there's a big debate. Do we have free will? And so much of what we believe we are choosing or deciding or wanting is conditioned by this world. But that doesn't take away that I have the potential to determine choices at my own discretion. Whether I choose to or not, whether I allow myself to be influenced and affected, that's a different thing. But there is an aspect of free will that we can have. So volition is the faculty of using one's will. And when we talk about agency, we're saying that is the ability to exert influence outside of oneself. Now, both volition and agency are needed, really, if free will is to be meaningful in this world. It's not just a question of wanting to change things, but it's a question of being able to exert influence along those lines. So, will is the expression of the inherent agency of the Atma. We all believe, or at least we tend to accept very commonly across society, that we have free will, we have agency. Therefore, we believe we are responsible for our actions. Therefore, we agree to be controlled by the rule of law. Because if we didn't have free will, then the rule of law would be rather capricious and nasty and wouldn't be fair and we'd all object. But because we have free will, we reckon, yep, if I've broken the law, that's my choice. I take responsibility. So, we deal with the questions and challenges in 2.6. and we showed that free will may be influenced, constrained and conditioned, but that's not contradictory to the fact that we have it. I may have free will but choose not to apply it. Now, what we're saying about volition is that the conscious entity, as the source of free will, expresses that will, and that defines the nature of what we're trying to achieve in this world. It defines the sort of identity, purpose and the agenda of our concept of ourself, which we call the actor on the stage of awareness. We have this concept of who we are and what we're in this world for, and how we interact with friends and family and society and so on. And our will seems to be trying to enhance those experiences. Now, in very simple terms, what seems to be happening is that our will is, on a subliminal level, can be summarized as satisfy me. I want gratification. And the cognitive functions of the mind and intelligence generate propositions to fulfill this agenda. And this produces intention expressed as desires, plans and ideas, And intention, therefore, is a sort of impetus. It's an energy that drives things on. It makes things happen. And these have a real effect. So intention is something that drives things on, makes it happen, and it does so because intention contains specifying information. And it is that flow of information from the mental state to the physical realm that produces action and manifestation within physical things. Now, to understand how that works, we need to appreciate the innate power of information. What do we mean by information, and how does it work? Well, definition. Some people, there's two aspects of information that the dictionaries will give you. One is facts about something, and the other is what is represented by a particular arrangement or sequence of things. And we gave some analysis of this in our last talk 2.8, but we're working on the basis that information is that stuff that defines the arrangement or order of other real stuff. That's the real context. Information itself has some form of reality. So let's look at what it does. Give you this example. You're at the supermarket and you're in the aisle with all the beans. Which can of beans do you choose? Well, your intention has to be applied to this huge range of choice, the general, and bring it down to the particular, your preferred choice. So in this case, we've chosen Heinz beans, the organic range. Now, why have I chosen that? Well, what was the information content of my intention? Well, as a vegetarian, I wanted beans. If I wanted a meal, beans are a good source of protein, so I'll start with beans. And I wanted a quick meal, so I'm going to go with baked beans. And which of the baked beans am I going to choose? Well, Heinz, they are the best. There are others available, but Heinz still the best. And not just the ordinary Heinz baked beans, but I've gone for the organic ones because I think that's better for the environment. So my choice has been specified because of the information content of my intention. So my intention contains specifying information that directed the final choice. And an example of how specifying information works is when you send some information from your computer to a printer. Whether it's a paper printer, you've got the data as within your computer, but that's just some electrostatic activity on your disk. That's not much use. You can't see it or read it for yourself. You need that data to be sent, and a form appears. A document with all sorts of black ink on it, with pictures maybe and words and things. Or in this case, we've used the example of a 3D printer. So there is some coding available in the computer, which then is being sent to the 3D printer and producing the manifested effect of the object. So specifying information produces form. Another example that we discussed last time was how specifying information acts on material ingredients. And using this example, we have a lump of clay. Now, the clay has potential. Its clay particles can be arranged in so many different ways, but at the moment it's just a big blob, right? So specifying information takes that potential, and instead of and out of all the potential that it could have, it arranges that it will have a specific form shown in the vase on the right. So information breaks down the potential of a situation and produces specific effect. This is a crucial understanding of the role of information within the process of cause and effect. So here are three principles of cause and effect that we are going to draw on, in terms of our understanding of information. That the input of information as choice and ordering turns a set of potential options into a specific outcome. So sometimes we express intention just as choice, and other times it's to do with its effect on ordering things, like when we design something, a building, a painting, a song, we compose creatively. That is specifying information being encoded within the product we design or compose. The properties of specific outcome are always contained, although latent, within the potential source. So you could say that pot was contained within that lump of clay. The vase, beautiful as it is, was contained within the clay ball. But it was only able to manifest because the specifying information took the potential of the clay particles within that and arranged them in this beautiful vase. Now, another point which is important, and we discussed this last time, and which actually becomes important as we'll bring this up again in one of our later talks on life, that potential is more important to a group. The specific is more important to the individual. Imagine you're at a pottery class, and I gave you each of a vase and said, now I want you to model a vase. And you said, but it's already a vase. I can't do anything with it. But if I give you each some clay, then you think, great, I can make the vase that I like. But once I make the vase the way I like, I think my vase is nicer or more useful, or the one I wanted rather than someone else's. So we each like there to be potential, because if nature provides us potential, that gives us more opportunity to create the specific outcome, the specific thing that we like. So potential is important to us as a group, but once we apply our own specifying information to that potential, we make the choices. So I walk away from the supermarket with my can of Heinz organic baked beans. Someone else has chosen something else. Very happy with their choice. And we gave some examples, and all I can do is just refer you to Talk 2.7, when we talked about the evidence produced by Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research. This was the engineering department did a 27-year study of how consciousness and intention affect the output of quantum-based random event generators, and also mechanical cascade, showing that consciousness not only affects quantum activity, but it also affects very much kind of Newtonian type physics. That's a fascinating study, worth showing. And we gave another example of an experiment that you can do yourself, creating 2 tubs of cooked rice, and you offer thanks to one and you're very nasty to the other tub. And this is what the 2 tubs look like after 8 years. The thanks rice is still intact after 8 years, whereas the full rice within 18 months was a nasty brown smelly liquor. So this rice experiment shows that intent alone can affect the rate of chemical processes in organic matter. It has applications in biology. So, as a summary of these points that I want to take from parts 1 and 2 of the webinar series. Consciousness is a non-neural, non-physical, non-mental function. It is its own aspect of reality. Consciousness, this is the you that is the ultimate witness and experiencer of your thoughts and actions. You are a unit of consciousness. We call this unit of consciousness the Atma. And you as the Atma express your own free will to vary your experiences of this world. Doesn't mean that you can do anything and achieve anything you want, but you certainly wish to vary your conscious experiences to make them as favourable as possible. So, your will to vary experience is developed by the cognitive functions of the mind into intention, which is then further developed as detailed desires, plans, ideas, and so on. This intention, these desires, plans, and so on, contain information, and it is that information which then becomes embedded within physical stuff and produces action and manifestation in the physical world. Your intention has power. Now, I didn't mention previously, but it's worth just taking a moment to say there are some charlatan persons offering various courses on manifestation and abundance, Think and Grow Rich and all this sort of stuff. They don't work. The only person who becomes rich is the person who's selling the books and the courses. And there are reasons why that doesn't work. And that can be a subject for another talk. But I want to take these last few minutes just to introduce you to part 3. So, the analysis we are given provides a key to understanding how the world works. And it's crucial to understanding this thing we cherish most within the universe, i.e. life. And that's where we're going next. The oldest question of them all, life. What's it all about? We're going to look at standard interpretations and theories of the origins and proliferations of life. We're going to look at abiogenesis, which is the self-assembly of living organisms. We're going to look at various forms of evolutionary theory. We're going to consider how these ideas, what they have, where there's merit, and where they fail to explain the key issues about life and biology. And we need to do that first, just to indicate that we have a deficiency in what is being presented as the standard narrative and beliefs about life. And we need to do that so we can open our minds to having a radically new idea of what life is. And it's an idea that will be much more in tune with your own sense of yourself and your connection with this world and its wonder. And we'll also show that what we are presenting in the Atma Paradigm on life is a much better fit to the actual scientific evidence than the stories and narrative that have been presented in terms of origins of life and evolution. So I think this will be a fascinating aspect for you. We will be exploring it in terms of the problems of information. Everything that is there in this universe contains so much information. And the big question that philosophy and science, when they give a physicalist approach to the world, is that they cannot explain where this information comes from, other than to say it seems to have arose simply just from chance interactions. So we're going to look at where information comes from to define the first organisms, single cell organisms, to maintain that, to produce variation and so on. We're going to, oh, actually I'm going to skip these. We're not going to be doing them today. Sorry about that. So just to conclude, summary of today's talk. Consciousness is a primary aspect of reality. Consciousness interacts causally with matter. The interaction of consciousness with chemistry produces the special life functions of biology. So life can only be understood when you understand what consciousness is and what matter is and how the two interact. We will show in these talks that there is no accepted theory for the biological origin of life. We will show that the evidence cited for evolutionary theory actually reveals a completely different narrative and explanation of life's origins. And we propose a new consciousness-based system for appearance and adaptation for all species. So we will give the Atma Paradigm presentation of how life appears on Earth, how it proliferates, how it adapts, and so on. So, consciousness-based view of life not only explains the science, but connects us with all life and reveals the actual incredible potential provided for unlimited experience and enjoyment within all the species. So I hope that you'll find this an exciting journey with us. Please, we'll be present here every Thursday. I've completed my hour, so I'm not going to take questions and answers today. But I feel that probably most of the answers and questions will have been dealt with in previous talks. So I hope that the slides are available on Facebook, so you can see and get the references for that. But what I would ask is that join us next week for 3-2 when we look at what's life, and we look at issues identifying the origins of life on Earth. So that'll be 6 p.m. UK time.